Hello. Today is Friday, April 17th. And for those of you who follow the astrological signs, today's a new moon. It's supposed to be a really strong new moon. So I hope that you all have new endeavors that you're interested in today. I'm Cindy Allen. I'm CEO of Trade Force Multiplier, a global trade consultancy service, handling complex strategy discussions as well as small classification projects and everything in between. Welcome to Simply Trade Cindy's version, where I base an international trade update on a Taylor Swift song. Today's song is Clean. This session is brought to you in association with Global Training Center. But first, what has happened in international trade today? We've had a little bit of a busy week again. On the Hill, the Senate Finance Chair, while he said they needed to review both first sale and non-resident importer, which are both bills that have been introduced, he has no current plans to introduce it in Congress. So citing overall tax reforms that are needed, and it kind of lumped those in. So I don't think we're going to see any urgent action on those two bills, which is good news for those of us in international trade who are dealing with a plethora of other things. The House members again tried to challenge the president imposing tariffs, but it was blocked again, and they have indicated what they'd like to do is make sure that the tariffs have no force or effect. But again, that did not move forward. At the White House, social media posts indicate that there will not be a 50% increase on China due to selling weapons to Iran, because they've agreed not to do that. So that's good news. No new tariffs for China, according to the social media post, at least. In DC, Treasury Secretary Bessent indicated that IEEPA level tariffs should be in place by the beginning of July using other authorities other than IEEPA. He also said he just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that some of these refunds were going overseas and some would be going back to China. And that is true. If there were importers of record in China or in other countries, they would be entitled to the refunds as they paid the duty to begin with. The war in Iran is still ongoing. The Strait of Hormuz is under the control of Iran and Oman. We do hear that it's open, but it's unclear as well if they are charging fees or tolls for safe passage in that area. There have been some reports of that. Some have questioned the legality that Iran has to charge tolls to go through the Strait of Hormuz. However, this is an ongoing situation. In Beijing, China issued stricter regulations around previous anti-foreign sanction laws. And these are further restrictions for the undue extraterritorial jurisdiction measures that they have in place already. This is just a strengthening of those laws. And if anyone has dealt with China for the past couple of years or have operations there, you know, this is a specifically tricky area for U.S. companies who have to make sure that they maintain compliance with U.S. laws, but also maintain compliance with Chinese local laws as well. If you have operations in China, you're probably already aware of this. And if you're not, you may want to talk to your counsel as it deals with China and Asia. In court, Section 122 was challenged, asserting that the required balance of payments issue can't technically be met due to the U.S.'s removal of the gold standard in the 1970s. That was the basis of their appeal. There has been no decision, but the court arguments were interesting to read. So for those of you who are interested, I go to the CIT and read that hearing. Very interesting and very detailed for those of us trade nerds who like to do that for fun. At Customs and Border Protection, this week, I was at the NCBFAA annual conference. That's the National Customs Brokers and Forwarders Association annual conference in San Antonio. And unfortunately, due to the budget issues, CBP personnel were not allowed to attend. We did miss them. However, we understand and continue to support our colleagues at CBP. And with the CAPE process coming out, we understand they might be a little bit busy this week. On that regard, under CAPE, new details of the CAPE process were outlined both in writing and in a couple of in-person meetings that Customs had with different trade associations, as well as a couple of webinars that they held that were very broadly attended. I'm talking thousands of people on each of these calls to hear CBP outline the CAPE process in detail. We do know now that the CSV file that is a request for the CAPE processing is only entry numbers, as I had predicted it's going to be very simple information, only the entry numbers. That's all CBP needed. This is going to roll out next Monday on April 20th. One point of clarification is that while this is a process and it seems pretty simple, if you want to get the details of that, go on CBP's website. I also covered it in a couple of the Simply Trade Cindy version podcasts in detail about how the process works in theory. Now we know how it works, and we'll see on Monday how it actually works. This process is not the whole picture. This is just the process. It does not touch the policy. It does not touch some key areas that we're concerned about. You must determine when and if you want to file. CBP indicated on the webinars that they will not be putting a time limit on this right now. They do know that there will be a massive demand of filing on Monday, and they urged everyone to be patient. But if there is a need to do a post-summary correction, you need to determine how you want to handle that. If you have a correction that needs to be made, or maybe you are dealing with the automotive credits, where you have to file a license number via post-summary correction. One of the things that they've said is it's likely that you should do the post-summary correction first and then do the IEEPA after that. We don't know. What if the entry is past the 100 or the 80-day liquidation cycle? That is the limit for CAPE. We know that you can file any unliquidated entries and any entries that have been liquidated within 80 days. If it's past that, we don't know what's going to happen. Most lawyers are now saying file a protest if you're within that 180 days. After the 80 and within the 180 days, go ahead and file a protest to protect your rights, because we don't know what is going to happen with that whole book or whole volume of entries. The court hasn't addressed it yet. We don't know if they're going to end up issuing the money. CBP has built a system to allow it, but the court has the jurisdiction over whether those funds are going to come. Most are saying they will. The court has been pretty clear that they believe all duties that were paid under IEEPA should be refunded, but we just don't know the mechanism that that's going to happen. We have this CAPE process. We know the parameters of the filing, but we don't know for those entries that have been finally liquidated, that's after 180 days, or liquidated within that 80-day to 180-day process. So talk to an attorney if you fall in those two buckets of entries. We don't know what's going to happen with those two groups. Another open question is we do not know how a broker system is going to be updated. As a broker for 40 years in this industry, I'm a little concerned. We do know that the ACE reports should be updated with the new information once CBP has processed those entries and those IEEPA lines and tariff numbers are taken off. However, your ACE report is not going to automatically translate to the broker system. So that's an open question that the brokers have posed to CBP. Are we going to get a file to update our systems? Will we have to query so we know what the new information is? That would create a challenge, as there's 53 million entries, and every broker querying that might be a little bit of an issue for CBP to handle. They likely, if that is the case, will issue some parameters that they'd like us to do that. We also don't know if ACE is going to handle the volume. And I'm not necessarily worried about the actual request, because that's just a CSV file that's going to come in through the ACE portal. You're going to be able to list all of those entry numbers and get that settled in ACE. But the real work happens when CBP does the processing, where they're actually taking those IEEPA tariffs off of the entry summary. But one of the things that CBP has learned is that making major changes or doing major processing should happen at night when there are fewer entries being filed in ACE and there's less volume. So I imagine they've looked at that volume of processing that's going to happen on the back end and determine how they can do that best in the batch processing. And I think that's likely why they need some time to work through those entries, because they need to be able to schedule that in a manner that's not going to affect brokers who are filing entry summaries or those who want to access portal reports. So we don't know. Thank you, CBP, for outlining that information. I think they did a great job in outreach to the trade associations, as well as by holding these webinars, which gave a lot of detailed information on the process. Policy questions, still reach out to your trade attorneys. So why did I choose Clean as the title for the Taylor Swift song today? The lyrics that are specific in this song, which is from her 1989 album, are: "The drought was the very worst when the flowers that we'd grown together died of thirst. It was months and months of back and forth." And I think that the flowers that we grew together really is the World Trade Organization, trade and government relationships, decades long cooperations that led to understanding and led to prosperity. And they're withering a little bit under the uncertainty and the strain. I talked a little bit about the U.S. trade rep and his really challenges with the WTO, and the thought that it's possibly past its prime and that we should move on as a trade community. So I think that's a very appropriate lyric. And then further, she talks in the song about rain came pouring down when I was drowning. That's when I could finally breathe. And I think right now the rain is the flood of court actions and decisions, that executive orders, the CBP issuance of guidance, the Section 232 cases and the 301 cases that are out now. But we're really reaching a point of decision and action. We're getting some of that information now. The rain is providing clarity into what we see in the future. And really, we're going to come out of this with a clean and new understanding of what international trade looks like. So that's it for this week. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.